All right. Stephen here with Adrian and Jason, developers on CodeSpells, and this is our monthly update for the month of October. And I, for one, am loving the loading screen, but while it's loading, maybe Adrian and Jason, can you give an overview of what we're going to see?
Yeah, totally. So this month we mainly worked on API stuff, so the interface for creating spells. We embedded the Blockly interface into the API and cleaned up some things to make it a little bit more intuitive. So we want to show some of that off. There's not very many changes to the procedural terrain and stuff like that from last month. Mainly we were doing stuff on the side of spell creation, so that won't change too much. But we have added also a few more things like the mana system and a few other more things in the direction of an actual game. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So user interface and the experience of crafting spells. So we'll look at some of those interfaces. So shall we start now?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Cool. So I'm already seeing some bars down in the lower right. Can you tell me what those mean?
Yeah, so we have the green bar is our life bar. We have 50 life. The orangish one is earth. Then from there it's water, fire, and air. Right now, the only one that's actually getting affected, sorry, is the earth one. So whenever we do earth spells, that mana gets depleted. Right now we have it set to just fill up over time. So a spell will take up mana and then it'll come back over time. We have a few different ideas for how we're going to actually implement that, but this is just so that we can test it right now. We want to have some element of collection of mana from the world, so we'll have that in a lot more detail for the next monthly update. It is also hooked up so that if you're underwater, the water mana will deplete. And if your water mana is completely depleted, then your health will start going down as well. And all that's pretty rudimentary, but we wanted to start adding some elements of gameness just so that we can actually start playing it and start testing different ideas.
Cool. I should also point out that we are streaming this on Twitch right now. This is the first time any of us have ever done a Twitch broadcast before, so we actually didn't invite anyone to watch it live except for people on our team. But next month we'll try to do it live. And on that note, our team member responsible for watching the stream is telling us that she's getting just a black screen right now. So I'm not sure we are actually streaming.
Okay.
Can we take a moment to see what's going on with that?
Is there sound also?
Lindsay, any sound? Lindsay, you can hear us? Okay, so yes, the audience can hear us, but they are seeing a black screen.
Okay. So can you see now?
Yep.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful.
So, all right. So do you want to? Yeah.
Yes. So let's pretend we just started, and you were explaining some life bars here, and so you're saying the green one is for life, and actually the rest are mana bars, not life bars, and then it's the yellowish one is earth, and then the blue is water, and then fire, and then air. And you're saying that some of them do deplete over time, and particularly they deplete with mana use.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. So how about we showcase a spell written in game, because that's something that we actually didn't have in the last monthly update.
Yeah. So we can open up our spell. We have a wheel that shows spells we're currently using, but we can open up our spell creation. And do you want to look at a spell first so we can kind of get an idea?
Yeah, sure. Let's look at an existing spell.
Okay. So this is the push spell. It's a very simple spell that basically when it's created, it sets the speed of the orb to medium. We can set it to slow, medium, or fast. When it hits something, it creates an elastic connection to it. And that's pretty much the whole spell. There's some indicators, this is not final, but there's some indicators here that show how much mana usage it takes. So the first time it creates an elastic connection, it will use up 1 mana, and we have 5 mana. And then over time, it'll use 2 mana per second. As this is an earth spell, it'll use 1 earth per second as well. We'll have more detailed ways of showing that in the long run, but we do have a couple of minor debug things that can also display that information. So,
but just from a user interface perspective, this is a big leap forward because I actually probably no one knows this, but this spell writing interface in the early versions was not actually in the game. It was we kind of did a hack where the game was in the web browser and we would display the spellcrafting interface on top of the game. So it was kind of like we faked it, but you've actually gotten the same interface to be here inside the game, which I know is something that you were pushing for. I would have been fine to have it be a web-based game, but can you tell me why it's cool to have the whole thing integrated into one piece of software?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes it easier to having a web player version is totally cool. And in fact, we talked about actually making a simplified version of the game for the web player, but we want it to be a big game, and having it be based in the web player would just require more. It would require more specific attention to different operating systems. Since we're using Unity, if we have one solution that works within Unity, then we can just distribute it easier like that. It also, we don't have to worry about people having to download the game. They're in the web player and stuff like that. So this just makes it easier on us to have it all packaged into a single thing.
Right, and theoretically, it can even deploy to consoles, right?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, we don't have any plan for that, but having the option to eventually do that in the future is totally cool. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to just have everything within Unity. The other version worked, but it just limited us in certain ways. And it also depended on browsers and graphics performance of different browsers. And even though they have hardware support, it's not going to work as fast as a native app.
And so what am I seeing what are the numbers in the top right of the spell writing interface? I do notice that the colors correspond to the colors of the mana bars, so I assume it has to do with mana, but what am I looking at there?
Yeah, so this is the mana that you give the spell when you initially cast it. This is also, we'll have some icons in here and make this more clear, but what I'm saying here is for the push spell, when I create it, I need to give it 5 mana. So I start off with 50 mana, as you can see down here behind the interface. So to be able to cast the push spell, I need 5 mana. I could change that to 2, but then I run the risk of since the push spell uses 1 mana per second, as it's an earth spell, once it hits an object, if it didn't have enough mana to create that elastic connection, it just wouldn't be able to do it. So it's a little arbitrary. We're going to have tools for actually displaying that better. We have one graph that shows that in slight detail, but we'll display that in more robustly. But basically, this is saying that we're using 5 earth mana, 0 water mana, 0 fire mana, and 0 air mana. We were
Cool.
playing with the idea of earth spells using like we were like raising sand, then we could say that, or lifting sand, it could use some earth mana as well. Um, but
Cool.
yeah,
So can you demo this spell just
yeah,
as it is? So now that we've kind of looked at the code, well, actually, let me just read the code here. So on create, it's actually going to set the speed of the spell to medium, and then oh,
yep,
I've lost it. There we go.
it's
Okay,
back. Yeah, there you go.
my bad. And then when it hits something, it creates a connection to it, so it'll kind of and then I guess it'll keep moving. Nothing will stop it, so it'll drag it along, and that's why we get the push effect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think I understand the code. So let's see it actually push something.
Cool. So if we go over here, since that's the one we were editing, it's selected. You can see that at the top left that it's our selected spell. So we go up to one of these rocks and we fire it. You'll see that it pulls it along with it. You can also see the mana. Whenever I shoot it, it depletes 5 every time I shoot one of these push spells. It depletes 5 of the 50 mana.
Very cool. And it. So actually, the mana, giving it 5 mana, actually has the effect of controlling the strength of the spell, because once it has depleted the 5 mana, it dies out, right?
Yep.
Which is why essentially that it pushes it a little bit, but then it sort of falls back. So could you show what happens if you kind of give it more mana?
Yeah, totally. So let's add 25. So if we do 25, it'll last a very long time. It's kind of stuck in the ground there as it's rolling. But you'll also notice that if I shoot 2, then I need to wait for for my mana to go back up. But that rock is still pinned there because the push spells were still going.
I see. Right, because the spells move in a straight line. They go through the ground, and then the rock kind of gets stuck there.
Yeah,
very cool.
And we could change that behavior to do something different, but here this rock is just being pulled against the ground.
Ah, so it kind of sticks to the wall. Very cool. Actually, I like that effect.
Yeah. So you do
cool.
A little elevator. The wall. But yeah. So let me change that one back because a couple of the other spells depend on it. But
oh, I see.
cool.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, actually. So you said a couple other spells depend on this spell, and that, I mean, I'm a programmer, so that's why I think that's awesome, is you can actually use a spell in other spells. So you can write a bunch of low-level spells and then write more complex spells on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So can we look at something that uses that spell, or something that just uses any other spell?
So I like the push circle. This is very simple. And what it does is whenever it's created 8 times, it just turns and it creates an orb. When you do this create orb, you tell it the name. We'll have a nicer interface for selecting the spells than having to type in the name. And then you say how much mana. So before we gave it 5. In this case, we're just giving it 4 to make the numbers nice. This has a total of 32 mana. And yeah, so when you create an orb, it inherits its parent's rotation. So in this case, since we're turning left, it'll create all the orbs in a circle around us. So if we go
I see.
over here, it'll just shoot a bunch of push spells around us.
Yeah, so instead of having to cast the push spell yourself, you essentially write another spell that casts a bunch of push spells.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
It kind of acts like a shield. There's another one that's pretty cool. There's an explosion. And okay, so this one this is kind of a multi-layered one. So explosion, what it does is on create, it sets the speed to fast. When it hits something, it creates a push shield where it's at. And then the push shield, when it's created, loops 20 times, it sets its rotation to random. So before we were setting the rotation by turning it, here we're setting a completely random rotation, and it
Okay.
creates a push orb in that random rotation. So the push shield, if you use it on yourself, I have to wait for my, it just creates orbs in random directions that kind of protect you. Seeing kind of like.
Oh, neato. Yeah.
But if we look at the explosion, what's happening is when we create it, it's setting its speed to fast. It inherits the velocity that we pointed in, and then when it hits something, it creates a push shield at that point. So it's basically creating what protected us wherever it impacts. So if we shoot it at the ground, it'll push out from there.
I see. I see. Very cool. Very cool. So, so tell me, I want to hear a little bit about kind of the vision and where this is headed. So actually, maybe this is a question for you and Jason. Let's take one of these spells like a push spell. And Jason, can you tell me how this might fit into gameplay in the final version of the game? Like, why might you want to use a push spell?
Well, there's going to be a lot of physical objects that you're going to want to move. So just from the start, you might want to move a lot of rocks out of the way. It also, let's say there's a river flowing down into this valley right here, and there's a big boulder in the middle, and it's kind of blocking it up. You could move it and increase the flow of water down into something. You know, there's a lot. Once all the systems are in, having an effective way of moving objects will be a big deal.
Cool. And Adrian, what about something like a push shield? What can you sort of tell a story or extrapolate how that might be useful in the version where the systems are all in place?
Yeah, I mean, at some point we're gonna have multiplayer, so obviously, if someone is throwing rocks at you, that'll be useful to defend yourself. I mean, there's also the case where you'll be deforming the terrain and rocks will fall on you and you'll need to defend yourself from that. So I mean, it's just a way of interacting with the world. I don't know that there's any one specific thing that it'll do. I mean, the action is to move stuff out of the way or to protect yourself from things that are flying at you, and that'll kind of depend on the game mode that you're playing.
Yeah,
Right,
I
right.
mean, you could imagine a crazy Rube Goldberg machine that you set off by just rolling a rock down a hill.
Yeah.
Starting a chain reaction.
Yeah. Or, I mean, you could also pull rocks into a shape to create a little shelter for you, or you could create a trap that once a creature or another player comes by it, it launches some stuff at them. So.
Right, right. So I guess I'm asking not a very good question. It's kind of like asking a person, why would you move your hand? And the answer is, well, it depends, you know, because the world is a complex place, and there are a lot of reasons I might move my hand.
Right.
And so you're envisioning a very, very complex world with a lot of systems that kind of affect each other, and so there are a lot of reasons you might want to manipulate physical objects in a variety of different ways.
Right.
Yeah, that's what's great about having a super systems-based design. The people will find something to do with that push spell that we probably can't even think of right now.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
We expect for there to be uses for all this stuff that we just don't really know or understand right now. The main thing is just to create the systems and make them as physical and dynamic as possible so that people can break stuff.
So I noticed the mana is regenerating very quickly. Is this something that you expect will persist as the game evolves?
No, I mean this is for the alpha, we're not sure what we're going to do with the mana just yet. We really want to go more in the direction of a collection of mana as a resource. Like right now, I can lift sand wherever I want, and basically there's no cost to it. So we want some element of needing to collect earth mana. So if you want to add sand over here, you'd have to come over to an area that has sand and find some sort of orb, some magical manifestations of that element there. And that would just increase your mana. We're also potentially just going to open that up to the game mode, which kind of seems like avoiding the problem, but we'll definitely have a couple of different ways of balancing that. And we want it to feel more like you are gaining an element as opposed to just being able to drop sand wherever you go, and we'd rather associate it with what's around you. We want fire to be related to heat where you are. If you're at higher altitude, it's colder, so fire magic is harder. So it might vary per element as well. It might be.
So there's an interesting feedback loop almost. It's like the spells you have allow you to affect the environment, but then you may run out of mana, and the way you get mana is from the environment, and even maybe from affecting the environment and getting to new places. And so the gameplay is this kind of continual, at least in the broadest sense, the gameplay is this continual affecting of the environment, but also gaining mana from it to enable you to continue affecting it in ways that you want to.
Yeah, and you can even imagine like a game where there are just little orbs that you need to pick up, and having one at a very difficult place, like at the top of that mountain, would be a fun thing to try to figure out how to get to. If you had limited resources and you had to get to the top of that mountain, it would not be an easy thing to do. So we're playing around with different ideas for limiting resources, but we definitely will not just have it recharge super quickly like it is doing right now.
So we have a question in the chat, actually from our, as we mentioned before, from one of our team members who's helping us test out this Twitch-based update model. But she asked a good question: Is mana collection going to be in creative mode?
Yes. Yeah. That'll definitely be in creative mode. So the creative mode for that will be releasing September of next year. We want it to actually feel like a game. We don't want it to just feel like you're creating spells. We want you to have some sort of gameplay loop where you do feel like you can do stuff and actually have some objective. The main thing that will be missing is multiplayer and animals, or life. So we will definitely have that built in at that point where you will be interacting with the world a little more. Right now it just feels a little bit static in terms of the world being there and you doing stuff to it, but it never having anything interesting to find or to search for. So we'll definitely have that, and hopefully by the time of the alpha there will be some preliminary version of that. So we're going to work on that some this month before the alpha.
Right. So will there be actually in what is going to get released? Is there going to be a mode in which you have unlimited mana, kind of? And I take this to be what the question in the chat is asking, akin to creative mode in Minecraft, where there are essentially no restrictions.
Yeah. So kind of the Minecraft is brilliant in so many ways, and one is that even in the creative mode, you're limited by how fast you can click.
Sure.
And if you cause a massive TNT explosion, the game kind of explodes.
True.
But it's very hard to break it. In our case, it is very easy to break the game, so we do need some limitations in that way. For the creative mode, the limitation, I mean, we'll allow you to set that cap, but there will be certain limitations where we say if you try to go beyond this, things might explode, but you're welcome to try to do that if you don't mind the game exploding. So
Now,
we'll
I
have
think
a limit where we say this is not really safe, but we will have. We don't. I mean, we want people to use it however they want. So I don't see any reason to not allow them to have a break everything mode where you have completely unlimited mana.
right.
Yeah.
So someone with enough mana could cause the systems of the world to just go so crazy that the computer can't even handle it. Essentially.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
if you
pretty
tried to
easily.
add, yeah, I mean, if you just made a spell that tried to add sand everywhere in the world at once, it would break. I mean, there's a lot of optimizations based on the idea of changes being localized and settling.
Yeah.
So having streams like waterfalls and stuff like that is completely fine, but trying to do a massive change where everything is changing at the same time would cause some problems. But if for some reason you have a beastly computer, or if at some point we have some method for offloading operations to more than one computer or whatever, then we'll have that open. There's no reason to limit any of that. We'll just have warnings that say, beyond this point, play at your own risk. It might break the game, but you're welcome to add water everywhere in the world and try to explode the game. It just will probably explode and get really
Right.
slow.
So I guess to answer the question in the chat, which was, is mana collection going to be in the creative mode? The broad answer is, there will be a creative mode wherein you're not restricted by mana, but that that there will be mana restrictions in pretty much any other game mode, and those mana restrictions are not just there to be fun, which, I mean, they may also be fun, but they're also there to make sure that people can't do something so insane that it breaks the game and causes the computer to crash.
Yeah, and in a multiplayer game, we'll obviously have to set restrictions, and you'll be allowed to set those restrictions for whatever gameplay or whatever game mode you create as well. So yeah,
right.
We
So
don't care if people break the game. Like, that's a good thing if you're breaking the game, but we want it to be clear why it's breaking when it is breaking.
right. It's worth pointing out that this is a game that gives people more power than I want to say any other game. Maybe there's something else out there that's analogous, but by virtue of the fact that you can code in the game, you have more power than any sort of just non-coding game would give you, because you can not only affect what you see on the screen, but you can send out spells that affect anything anywhere in the world. So you can do these like massive, large-scale changes because you're able to code them. And so that's why the mana becomes extra important, not just as a gameplay mechanic, but as a way to keep you from breaking things, actually, in some of the more playable game modes.
Yeah, and we've talked about the idea of like of making loops and stuff like that take up mana, and there is some element of there, and at a certain level we can do that for things like Blockly. We can say like a loop has this much cost, but when we start thinking about other languages, if we want to expand it, that gets a lot harder. So if we do something like showing you how expensive your spell could potentially be, I mean, it's impossible to know. Obviously, it's impossible to know if a program can terminate. We're not going to solve that, but there is some way of showing you how expensive the operations you are doing in some way, then that'll most likely come in Blockly as the learning side of it. And when we move to other languages, we won't have, it'll be a lot more difficult to show those things. So we've thought about penalizing you for infinite loops and stuff like that, but we're thinking of just moving it more towards you have a set time for your spell to execute, a fractional amount of time, and you can set that in the game mode if you want to allow people to write a spell that takes up way too long in processing, then that's fine, but generally in the game it'll just kill the process if it takes too long and just say, that didn't work, this is where it stopped, and instead of penalizing you for mana, it'll just cost you in terms of taking too much CPU time.
Cool. So what if, because I know this would happen to me, and I'm a programmer, and I'm sure it'll happen to people who are just playing the game for the first time. What if you need to debug your spell? Like it doesn't do what you expect it to do.
Yeah.
Are there any tools to help that process?
Right now we have a very simple tool for that, where if you right-click, you cast a spell, and it shows you the mana usage of the spell.
Whoa.
So as you cast it, you can see this one had 4 earth to start with, and it depleted all the earth. It has no water, fire, or air.
Whoa, it actually gives you a little graph.
Yeah, and it shows a little graph over time. That was just kind of a fun little thing we were playing with. It doesn't do too much, but we'll add a lot more to this. We'll make it so that you can customize what this is displaying. We also want to show you what current. So we have the API is built around the idea of having different powers associated with an orb, and they're very atomic powers, so you can make them do whatever you want. Adding sand and removing sand are atomic functions, or creating an elastic connection is another atomic function. And we can display which of those is being used and how much mana they're using, so that you can debug and say, I created a push spell, but every time it hit something, it tried to create an elastic connection as opposed to just the first object it hit. Or if the mana gets depleted before it even hits something, you can see it's because it was lifting up sand as it went, or whatever.
Right. Cool. So this, I know this last month of development has been a lot about kind of solving some really difficult challenges, like getting the coding interface to be inside the game, and getting this debug interface inside the game, and solving various other technical challenges. So and there hasn't necessarily been a lot of update on the art, but I would like to hear from Jason, and just in terms of the vision. Like, what would you say is the next step, or the next few steps, in terms of making the game look beautiful and be fun to play?
Well, one thing that we are working on right now is how we're going to have procedurally generated terrain with 3D assets that know where to plant themselves on the level. So, for instance, in that mountain across from where Adrian's running, how do we put generate like a modeled 3D mountaintop or a canyon top and stick it on there? Because there's obviously limits to things to height map terrain. You can't have overhangs, and we just might want some unique asset that have more meaning to the player, create more interesting shapes. So right now I'm doing some samples of how I would decorate this terrain with 3D objects if I were to hand place it. And then Adrian and I are going to go back and figure out what that logic is, so we can teach the computer to plant them when it generates a level. So basically teaching the computer to do an environment art pass on the level.
And that's,
Right.
This month will be a lot more about that. So the month of November will be adding all sorts of fancinesses to the game and polishing it up to get it ready for the alpha release. This past month was more of just like figuring out low-level things and getting everything in place so that we can be in a better position to actually release stuff. So
Yeah.
for now, like
Right.
after this point, we're just gonna polish it up and make it feel like a real game and look really good.
Yeah, and we
Right,
really like one of the things about the environment now is that I think we really like the way it generates this terrain, but it generates very similar features because of the erosion passes and stuff that we do. You get these hills, you get a little ledge, it's kind of a canyon shape. So what we want to do is be able to have the procedural generation place assets that you can use as landmarks, so that if you're running around, you're like, oh, there's that pointy mountaintop over there, and you know you can orient yourself by it, so that everything doesn't just look the same.
Right.
And the other side of that is we want them to have some sort of gameplay implications eventually as well. We want to set up rules to say there's a lot of sand over here, so there would be something, a manifestation. I'm going to say it. I did it. I'm sorry. No, but so there would be a little orb or something that would show some sand mana, or it could be an object that's placed there that becomes a pool of earth mana, so you can come buy it and refill, and then run up the mountain and add some more sand up there. So it basically gives you a way of carrying sand without needing another bar for it. We want the world to feel a little bit more meaningful, both in terms of art and also just in terms of stuff to do. Because it's fun
Right.
to run around. I haven't showed off swimming. There's no actual swimming animation, but you can jump into the water and swim around,
Float.
which looks ridiculous, but float around here. Lift the sand for that. But yeah, we want the game to just feel more like an actual game, because it doesn't feel very interesting right now.
I
Also,
noticed that it's depleting your water. Oh wait, are you dead? It just depleted your water mana and
Yeah.
your health.
There's no actual dead state right now.
Oh, okay.
But,
But you would have died if.
I didn't make it. I was not.
But so no, you raise a good point, and I would like to, in closing here, a little bit more about the envisioned gameplay, and I know that I've heard some talk of the kind of first stages of adding life to the game. So maybe Jason, can you tell us about the elementals that you mentioned to me earlier?
Sure. I mean, all of this is kind of speculative design, but we're trying to approach things in the world besides you that are doing something without necessarily creating a bunch of animals or NPCs, and also tying it into the system of mana. So one possible design that we're playing around with right now are elementals, which would be places in the world where there is high concentration of a particular type of mana, and over time it has a chance of spawning an elemental, which would be sort of a not really living, but sort of out of control, willful manifestation of a certain type of element. So you could have a spontaneous rock tornado that forms where there's a high concentration of earth mana, and maybe it's causing a lot of trouble, throwing rocks at you or messing with something that you're building, and you have to go calm it down and get it to sort of settle back down. And
So it's
then
somewhere
also
in
that
between.
might be a way for you to get mana.
So it's somewhere in between life and magic, life
Yes.
and a spell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like a little sort of spell that's sort of cast itself and is running
It's
amok.
Gone a little crazy in the world.
Yeah, it's a rogue spell.
Yeah.
Right. So it may be. So in terms of gameplay, it may be something that's dangerous to you, and you need to get away from it. It may also be something you need to be near because you need to get mana because you spent it all doing something else. So
Or it could be
these
something that you want to have around because it might keep another dangerous thing away. That's what,
Oh.
there's a lot of room to build out how it interacts with other elementals, how you could use it to, say, like, guard the entrance of an area where you are kind of like setting up your shop.
Yeah.
And
So you
be like, oh, well, I've got a rock tornado at the gate and I've figured out how to keep it there so it protects me.
So you could actually learn about and harness these elementals and use them for your own benefit.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. I mean,
Tame them.
yeah, we don't want them to get too complicated. We want them to be sort of easy to understand, just like spellcrafting is. Like, we want you to be able to look at them and understand them with the same elements that you understand spells. So you see how much mana it has, you see what it's doing, and then you can kind of backwards engineer
So what are we writing here, Adrian? What's the spell?
I don't know. I don't know if this will actually work. I don't think it's gonna cancel the orbit, so it'll still probably, yeah, it's not canceling the orbit. There's no actual canceling of the orbit, so it doesn't actually. I can add that into the API. But
Well, one thing I like about the systems-based gameplay is that you can have a lot of effects that completely surprise you. Like maybe you write a push spell and you push a rock out of the way, and like Jason said earlier, that allows more water to flow through a canyon, and so that fills up some kind of basin area. And then, like Jason was saying, the concentration of elements in that area has changed, and so maybe that spawns some kind of water elemental or angers the earth elemental in that area. And so from a simple thing you did, which is write a push spell and push a rock, you may end up with a whole bunch of water or earth elementals that you now have to go kind of calm down.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're aiming to achieve. Just to get it to a point where there is something meaningful to do, even when there is nothing to do. We want there to feel, before we even get to life and creatures and multiplayer, we want it to feel like stuff is happening in the world. And a lot of that is just using the systems that we've already built to place stuff, to place waterfalls and to place elementals like Jason was talking about, and just to get them in the game.
Yeah. And I like the idea of elementals being based on spells or feeling like spells, because then they sort of feel like wild magic. And you already understand how spells work because you've been writing your own. So you kind of understand why they behave the way they. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we already saw earlier, as Adrian demonstrated, spells can cast other spells. So if an elemental is a spell, then elementals can actually cast spells at you. I would assume.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that would be cool. To give you more credit than you give yourself in these videos, like you mentioned, it would be really cool if they used your spells against you. Like it'd be fun to have some element of them learning and using what you're doing against you. So yeah, that would be really cool.
I love it.
The elemental idea came from just this sort of wizard in the woods who like has to calm down some runaway thing that is just causing trouble. But it's not really like I gotta go destroy that water elemental. It's more like I better go talk to the river and get it to calm down a little bit so that life can go on.
Right.
Sort of the old man Willow from Lord of the Rings situation.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, Jason, I like every time we talk, you're always citing some other, body of work that has wizards in it. It sounds like you have read everything that involves wizards. What would you say? By the way, we've been going for about 30 minutes, so we got to wrap up.
Okay.
But I'm curious, what would you say is like the top inspiration for CodeSpells for you?
Well, visually, I'm still gonna go with the Dark Crystal. And in terms of building the world, in terms of the sort of style and feel of being a wizard, I really want it to feel like Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthseed books.
Oh yeah, I love
where
those.
Being a wizard is, it's like a special thing to understand how the world works like that. And she uses language as the main power that wizards have. They learn the names of things, and by learning their names, they can communicate with them and control them, like the wind or a dragon.
Right.
And I like the idea of taking that and making it code instead of just language. You don't just have to learn something's name, you have to learn how it behaves and why.
Right, and that explains why, there's, you're kind of steering the gameplay towards understanding the way that systems interact, because your power as a wizard, is proportional to also your understanding of the world. Like if you're a master wizard, may actually be able to write a very simple spell to have very, very complex outcomes, whereas a novice may actually have to try harder, might have to write a more complex spell because they understand the world less.
Yeah, I guess a really far-flung vision of where this could go would be you have a herd of animals and you want them to move, and if you were just going to try to strong arm your way through that, you might create a mind control spell and cast it on every single one of them. It would use up all your life mana.
Uh-huh.
Or you could just make a plant grow that they like over in another area. If you really understood what they ate or what they were scared of, you could get the whole herd to move with one simple spell by knowing more about them.
I love that. That is awesome.
That sort of Sauron is a evil magic guy who can sort of force people to do what he wants by taking control of their will. But a wizard like Gandalf just sort of makes a little suggestion. Yeah. Pushes someone out the door. Which is why Gandalf won.
I love it. Well, yes, stop trolling people. There are some Sauron fans out there.
Yeah.
All right, I love it. This is wonderful. I cannot wait to see what will happen next, and I can't wait to start controlling my own herd of animals subtly. With subtle spells. Anyway, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Lindsay, in the chat. Next month, we'll actually do this live, and we'll invite Kickstarter backers to come join us and ask questions live. Until then, see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.